So I really wanted to talk about truth and spiritual truths. And at the same time, I felt like I needed to somehow mention this whole piece around intuition because the two seem to be very related. And I don't want to go off and speak about truth until I really delve more deeply into this energy of psychic abilities and the Akashic Records and these other more or less metaphysical things. Just, I feel like it's going to bring us to some clarity, right? It'll be our kind of our foundation. So as a person who was raised with the belief that we are all intuitive in some way, and given many opportunities to play with and practice my own intuitive skills, I really have experienced a whole range of what I would call truths in that. So let me just take this apart for you. We had a family psychic growing up. So at a very young age, I was learning how to do the hands-on healing. I was learning how to meditate, to manifest, things like that. And it wasn't until I was much older that I actually started to go to this woman. She was just a dear family friend. In fact, she married my husband and I. And when I was in college, it was like, oh, I'm having a problem with whatever it was. And so I called her for a reading. Well, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 years later, I found the cassette tape in which, I recorded the reading, or she sent it to me or whatever. And none of it was accurate. It was just like, oh my gosh, she was so far off. And I still love, this experience that I had, growing up, having this openness about spirituality and psychic abilities. My mom has been teaching metaphysical skills for over 30 years. She and I together started teaching intuitive skills classes about 10 years ago. So this isn't new to me. What's interesting is that when I learned how to access the Akashic Records, I was really clear that I wanted to be so-called right, that I didn't want to give people information if it wasn't true, right? So what I did was, again, as I mentioned in the last episode, when I worked in my records at the beginning, I did a lot of introspective work and asked the records lots of things, about, what's true, what's right, things like that. And in my concern about not giving the right or true information, I asked the records, how do I know I'm right? And what I was told was, you will always be right, even if it's just for that instant, and maybe in the next instant, something else appears that is more correct, more true. And that was kind of odd. I'm like, okay, that seems a little strange. But at the same time, it allowed me to soften and experiment with working in this energy field and allowing whatever was coming through me and to me to just come through and say it. What was wonderful was I had clients in my office who were nodding as I was giving the information. So they were validating what it was that I was saying. It was trickier when I was over the phone with people because I couldn't see if they were agreeing with what I was saying, and I didn't get that instant validation. Now I don't need so much validation because I just bring what I bring. I don't have so much attachment or ego or fear around it. What I want to say about this energy field and the truth around this is that many people believe that the Akashic Records are sort of a library of sorts, and that all of our information is stored in this library, and we can go in and we can pull a book and read, whatever chapter in our lives or past lives to bring forth information. Now, what I want to say, what is true for me, is that this energy field is simply a field where vast love consciousness is so palpable, it has helped me shift into a way of viewing people with love and clarity. Now, you may find this hard to believe, but I actually am very judgmental. I was raised in a really judgmental household. Not only was, my mom very liberal and very political, and, these people were wrong, and how could they do this and suppress these people and women's rights and all of this stuff. Even in our own matriarch, she was the head of our family in essence, And every time something was going on, we were so enmeshed in my family that it's like, well, this person's not parenting right, and this shouldn't be happening over there. So I just grew up in this very judgmental home, very loving, but there was always an opinion. So it's been years of practice of me trying to release my judgment, trying to accept me for having judgment, for having an opinion, but also trying to let go of that stronghold. The beauty is that I was working with people, working in this field, specifically in the Akashic Records. And what I would find is that as I was getting information, I could actually hear my own judgment, like, oh, they're in a relationship they shouldn't be in. But meanwhile, the information would come through that was so loving and so clear that had no judgment whatsoever. And it was amazing because I was able to see so clearly the light in others. It was almost an invitation for me to step closer to people, for me to see their light, right? For me to see their truth. So we will cover some more. I don't know where I'm going to go with this exactly, but we'll cover some more about this energy of this love consciousness, Akashic Records field, but also this whole psychic ability, but also how it interacts somehow with this idea of truth. I'll begin by saying I absolutely love California. Just a couple of days ago, it snowed here, and we got maybe an inch of snow, and then by late morning, maybe it was even mid-afternoon, the warm rain washed away the snow, and then here it is today, absolutely gorgeous, sunny, and I'm wearing a tank top and a light sweater. Nonetheless, I wanted to continue our conversation and my ramblings, perhaps, on this idea of spiritual truth and even the Akashic Records. Now, I just finished, actually doing a reading where I was working in someone's records, and this whole idea of truth came through. And it was interesting because I've seen this for a very long time, which is, there are different perspectives, and each of us has a perspective, and that perspective, in essence, is our truth. Now, it may not match other people's truth, and it may not even be so-called right, but there is this valid place in which we perceive something, whether it's, through our eyes, through our sense of sounds, through our, senses in terms of our intuition, or even our judgments, what's going on with our brain. When we look at truth from a more spiritual aspect, there seems to be this belief that there's somehow a ultimate truth. Now, what I see is that, truth is very much like the North Pole, for example, that it helps in terms of trying to navigate, that we have defined, because of its pull, this idea of the North Pole or truth, and that we can have our compass that will help direct us in that way. And that compass is our conscience. That compass is maybe our upbringing. Really, it's an agreement that we've collectively made that this is north, this is south, right? It's on a slight 33-degree tilt. And then we've defined east and west. Well, it's easy on a flat, piece of paper to say, east is where New York is and west is where California is. But when we're looking at the world as a round space, it's harder to define, even though we call it the Middle East, right? Or the Midwest. They're still agreements. What I see with spiritual truths is that we have a lot of people who believe in a particular religion, and for them that becomes their truth. When it comes to working in the Akashic Records, one of the things that was really interesting to me is that the organization that I learned how to access the records through gave me a prayer. And basically they said, this is the prayer to use. It is the only prayer that will access the records, or something along those lines. And that this prayer had come from the Pleiades, and then it came down to the Mayans, and then it was translated into Spanish and therefore English. So don't change the prayer. It is like the most pure prayer ever. Well, in all honesty, I didn't resonate with the prayer. I used it, it worked, but it felt constricted to me. First of all, I felt that it was a little bit on the religious side. Second, it was a little bit on the victim-y side, and it was definitely sexist to me. In time, as I learned to develop my own relationship with what I perceived as the Akashic Records, I started to recognize that there were other ways to access this field, but more importantly, that access had to be, had to resonate with me. Hold on. Callie, come here. In this way, once I started to question this idea of, is this really the only way to access the records, I then found a book that gave a completely different prayer. And then I learned of other ways that people access the records, and suddenly I realized, aha, there are multiple ways to access this energy field. The other question is, does this energy field actually exist? Or is it something that is a tool for me to have access to deeper parts of my soul, or to a greater library, or whatever, right? So in other words, I like it when we can come to a place of trusting what our truth is, in spite of what's going on outwardly, whether it's a teacher telling us something, or whether it's a religion telling us something, or whether it's somebody who's done a reading for us that says this is true. But more importantly, to be open to the possibility that truth may not be ultimate, that it may not be true north, that there may not be a thing even called north on a round planet in an entire solar system. So we will again explore this a little bit more deeply in another piece, but that whole picture of truth has really been growing, partly because ironically this feels like 2016 is going to be a year in which many truths are revealed, and I believe that the paradox is that there may not actually be a truth. It'll be an agreement at some point, and that agreement hopefully will become more aligned with the love conscious beings that we are. And at the same time, when we step into these beings that we are, maybe there's even a greater truth that is so incredible that we go, wow, to that. And it's interesting because I will tune into something and then I really do feel like I'm just bringing the information. It's not even my information. It's just focus on, listen, allow. And while I was getting my thoughts going as to what is it that's coming through, what is it that I'm going to say, what I really heard and got was truth is a vibration. And in other words, as a vibration, it's a source of, it's an energy, right? It's energy, it's a frequency. And we know that energy can only be altered to become another form of energy, but it can never die. It can never be done. I'm really not a scientist, so let's try to bear with my non-science lingo here. The point being that there is no ultimate truth, just like there wouldn't be an ultimate vibration. So here's the thing. When I try to bring information through that is really intangible in many ways, or that has such a high frequency, or that is not what we, our everyday human selves, would comprehend with just an aha kind of a place, it can be really tricky for me to bring it through with the precise language that I want to convey the message with. So what happens is I find myself, tuning in, listening, trying to find just the right words, and kind of doing a lot of hesitating, right? As I was trying to speak earlier about truth being a vibration, it just got to that point where I felt like I hit this wall of, oh my gosh, this isn't coming out the way I want it to. So I want to express truth as a vibration in a different way. For one thing, when I do a reading, when I do an intuitive reading, sure, I could tap into a particular truth. And that's why my client feels validated, right? I might say, what I'm seeing is that you were wounded as a child and that you started to feel bad about yourself and blah, 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 blah. And therefore, this is a block that's happening, and they're nodding or, responding with, yes, that absolutely is true. But when I start to move into higher realms, and there are truths that they may not recognize, for example, me seeing in them that they are really a very awake soul who's bringing through information through their being, and they do this easily and naturally, but not necessarily consciously, they have a harder time taking it in or understanding it. So I have to find the words to say that, to convey that message. Well, what's interesting is that I have learned that it's really not the words per se, it's the frequency. So even if I don't get the words right, even if I don't say exactly what needs to be said, or even if it doesn't totally make sense, what I recognize is that when I'm in this energy field, the vibration of what I am trying to say comes through in spite of the words. So what I'm trying to do with this particular segment is really allow and trust that this vibration of me explaining that truth is a vibration, that it isn't ultimate, that it doesn't have a finite ending that we reach, will somehow be conveyed, not just in my words as best I can, but through the frequency itself. So I invite you to open up to that frequency within you that says, where do I know? Where do I trust? Where do I believe? Where do I tap into truth? And if what I'm saying resonates, then it is true for you in this moment. And that's perfect. If it doesn't resonate, yay, you've also found a truth in you that says, this isn't a match for me right now. And that's perfect too. So what I'm offering as these awake beings, as we journey through our own conscious, sometimes unconscious life, and we look for truth, what I'm hoping is that we start to recognize the vibration of truth rather than the actual words or knowing or dogma of what some people will start to hammer in as truth. What you may have experienced over time is that you may read a book and you say, wow, this really resonated. I already knew this information and therefore it's true. Or even you'll read something or hear something that you say, that really resonates. I've never heard it before and I just feel that it's true. And then there may be a time that you go, this just isn't working for me. Does that mean it's not true? Or does that mean it's not true for you right now? So, truth, is it real? Is it finite? Is it ultimate? Is it yours? Is it mine? And how do you interact with truth? How do you allow it to make your decisions? How do you work within your little segment of truth? Places to explore, things to contemplate, and I hope you take it all with some essence of truth in there for you. But if you don't, that's okay too.